refugees in the Near East, along with other United Nations agencies and international organizations in alleviating their plight, and calls for the full support for UNRWA's mandate to ensure the continuity of its vital programs and its contribution to regional stability. In light of continuing financial shortfalls, the NAM urged the international community to provide UNRWA with sufficient and predictable funding to ensure the continuity of its indispensable operations in all fields of operation. As Israel has clearly abdicated on its obligations as the occupying power to protect the Palestinian civilian population, as prescribed by the 4th Geneva Convention 1949, the movement also reiterates its long-standing call for international protection for the Palestinian people. This is urgent in order to alleviate the dire state of insecurity of the occupied population and prevent the loss of more innocent human lives. Failure to do that can lead only to further escalations and the tragic loss of more civilian lives. In this connection, the movement reiterates grave concern regarding lack of accountability for all violations committed by Israel in the occupied Palestinian territory, including East Jerusalem, many of which may amount to war crimes. The absence of justice only fosters greater impunity, leads to the reoccurrence of crimes, and destabilizes the situation on the ground, thereby further diminishing the prospects for peace. Member states of the movement continue to call for international action, particularly by the Security Council, to ensure a cessation of and the accountability for the violations that are being systematically committed by Israel against the Palestinian civilians under its occupation. The NAM reiterates that Israel must comply with its duties and responsibilities under international law and must be held to account if it continues its blatant contempt of this organ and its international legal obligations. Mr. President, with regard to the situation in the occupied Syrian Golan, the movement reaffirms that all measures and action taken or to be taken by Israel, the occupying power, such as its illegal decision of 14 December 1981, that purports to alter the legal, physical, and demographic status and the institutional structure, as well as the Israeli measures to apply its jurisdiction and administration there, are null and void and have no legal effect. In this regard, and in line with the NAM's principled position, the movement once again demands that Israel abides by Security Council Resolution 497 and fully withdraws from the occupied Syrian Golan to its 4 June 1967 borders in implementation of Security Council Resolutions 242 and 338. In addition, NAM reiterates condemnation of the unilateral and arbitrary proclamation by the United States of America on recognizing the Golan Heights as part of Israel. Moreover, the NAM member states emphasize that Israel must withdraw from all Lebanese territories, including Shebas Farm, the Kfar Shuba Hills, and the Lebanese parts of Al-Gajar village up to the Blue Line in accordance with the relevant UN resolutions, in particular Security Council Resolution 1701. To conclude, the movement seizes this opportunity to reiterate its call for the international community to act collectively with responsibility, to uphold international law, and to exert and intensify all necessary efforts in support of the just Palestinian cause, the ultimate goal of which is to bring an end to this historic and grave injustice. The now member states reaffirm their commitment to promoting a just, lasting, comprehensive, and peaceful solution to the question of Palestine in all its aspects, including for the plight of the Palestinian refugees, and reaffirm their support to the Palestinian people in their struggle to achieve justice and fulfill their inalienable rights and legitimate national aspirations, including to self-determination, freedom, independence in their sovereign and independent state of Palestine, with East Jerusalem as its capital. I thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of Azerbaijan for their statement. And I now give the floor to the representative of Argentina.
Muchas gracias, señor presidente. Agradecemos a la delegación de Brasil por propiciar este importante debate. La Argentina sigue creyendo que la única solución al conflicto entre palestinos e israelíes son las negociaciones entre ambas partes orientadas a buscar acuerdos sobre las cuestiones relativas al estatus definitivo identificadas en los acuerdos de Oslo, es decir, Jerusalén, refugiados, asentamientos, fronteras y medidas de seguridad. Mi país respalda una solución pacífica, definitiva e integral de la cuestión palestina, en base a la solución de dos estados, sobre la base de las fronteras de 1967 y de lo que las partes determinen en el proceso de negociaciones, de conformidad con las resoluciones relevantes de la Asamblea General y del Consejo de Seguridad. Argentina reafirma su respaldo al derecho inalienable del pueblo palestino a la libre determinación y a constituir un Estado independiente y viable, reconocido por todas las naciones, así como el derecho del Estado de Israel a vivir en paz junto a sus vecinos dentro de fronteras seguras e internacionalmente reconocidas. Asimismo, Argentina reitera su preocupación por el persistente y continuo crecimiento de los asentamientos ilegales israelíes en los territorios palestinos ocupados y exhorta a cesar su expansión. Tal como lo ha señalado en reiteradas oportunidades la Asamblea General, los asentamientos son contrarios al derecho internacional, obstaculizan la paz, debilitan la perspectiva de una solución de dos estados viviendo en paz y seguridad y promueven de ese modo la perpetuación de un statu quo insostenible. La gravedad de la situación ha sido reconocida por este Consejo de Seguridad en su resolución 2334 de 2016, cuyos términos reafirmamos plenamente. Por otra parte, Argentina condena todas las acciones violentas de Hamas y otros grupos armados. Resulta necesario que los líderes palestinos aborden con sinceridad las preocupaciones de la seguridad israelí. En este contexto, reconocemos el derecho de Israel a ejercer su legítima defensa, enfatizando la importancia de que las acciones israelíes sean respetuosas de sus obligaciones de conformidad con el derecho internacional humanitario, teniendo en cuenta en particular los principios de distinción y proporcionalidad. En cuanto a la situación en Jerusalén Oriental, Argentina reafirma el estatus especial de Jerusalén. De acuerdo a las resoluciones pertinentes de las Naciones Unidas, incluida la resolución 748 de 1980 del Consejo de Seguridad, y en tal sentido rechaza cualquier intento unilateral de modificarlo, en particular en lo que respecta a la Ciudad Vieja, que tiene una especial significación para las tres grandes religiones monoteístas. La Argentina considera que Jerusalén es una de las cuestiones cuyo estatus final debe ser definido por las partes en negociaciones bilaterales. Señor presidente, frente a las dificultades financieras por las que atraviesa el Organismo de Obras Públicas y Socorro para los Refugiados de Palestina en el Cercano Oriente, la Argentina desea reiterar su pleno apoyo a su labor, la que contribuye a evitar un deterioro aún mayor de la situación humanitaria en los territorios palestinos ocupados. Reafirmamos asimismo la necesidad de que la comunidad internacional elabore respuestas adecuadas para asegurar que cuente con los fondos necesarios para que sus servicios no se vean interrumpidos. En relación con el Golán sirio, Argentina mantiene una posición de principio con respecto a la ilegalidad de la adquisición de territorios por la fuerza y el respeto de la integridad territorial de los estados. Creemos firmemente en el principio de la solución pacífica de las controversias y por ello consideramos importante la búsqueda de una solución negociada del conflicto entre Siria e Israel con el propósito de poner fin a la ocupación de las alturas del Golán tan pronto como sea posible, de conformidad con las resoluciones 242 de 1967 y 338 de 1973 del Consejo de Seguridad y el principio de paz por territorios. Para culminar, Argentina desea instar una vez más a palestinos e israelíes a reanudar las conversaciones de paz, actuando de buena fe, con flexibilidad y de conformidad con el derecho internacional y las resoluciones pertinentes de la Asamblea General y el Consejo de Seguridad, en la búsqueda de un acuerdo sobre las cuestiones pendientes relativas al Estatuto Definitivo de Palestina en todos sus aspectos. Muchas gracias, señor presidente.
I thank the representative of Argentina for her statement. And I now give the floor to Ms. Amina Akada, Chargée d'Affaires ad interim at the Permanent Observer Mission of the Organization of Islamic Cooperation to the United Nations.
Thank you, Mr. President. I have the honor to deliver this statement on behalf of the Secretary of the Organization of Islamic Cooperation. Mr. President, as we meet once again to discuss the situation in the Middle East, including the Palestinian question, the current trajectory is becoming increasingly untenable and grimmer due to the ongoing Israeli human rights violation against the Palestinian people and grave breaches of international law, which are well documented and inherent in Israel's intricate system of apartheid, colonization, racism, and occupation, as outlined in many UN documents, including the report of the UN Special Rapporteur on the situation of human rights in the Palestinian territory, occupied since 1967. The OIC Secretariat expresses its deep concern over Israel's ongoing violations against the occupied city of Jerusalem, its citizens and holy sites, especially Al-Aqsa Mosque, Al-Haram al-Sharif, Israel's illegal colonial settlement policy, which has intensified, especially in and around occupied Jerusalem, the blockade on Gaza Strip, and the inhuman situation experienced by Palestinian prisoners, among other violations, which in many cases amount to war crimes. The OIC Secretariat welcomes and recalls in this regard the recent report issued by the Independent International Commission of Inquiry on the Occupied Palestinian Territory, including East Jerusalem and Israel, which clearly indicate that Israel has no intention of ending the occupation, has clear policies for ensuring complete control of the occupied Palestinian territory, and is acting to alter the demography through the maintenance of a repressive environment for Palestinians and a favorable environment for Israeli settlers. The report eventually highlighted that Israel's impunity is feeding increased resentment among the Palestinian people and is fueling recurrent tension, instability, and protraction of conflict and an endless cycle of violence that compromises chances for sustainable peace and security, and concluded that ending the occupation of lands by Israel in full conformity with Security Council resolutions remain essential in ending the systematic recurrences of tension, instability, and protection of the conflict. Mr. President, the OIC Secretariat would like to voice once again its strong condemnation of the heinous assassination of the journalist Shireen Abu Akleh by the Israeli occupation forces while on duty reporting facts and documenting crimes committed against the Palestinian people last May, stressing that this crime constitutes a blatant violation of international laws and norms and require immediate investigation and holding those responsible to account. Among other violations, reports have documented the killing and wounding of hundreds of Palestinian citizens in the second quarter of 2022. The OIC Secretariat reaffirmed in this regard that accountability deficit toward the Israeli countless crimes against the Palestinian people create an environment where impunity thrives, encouraging further abuses and violations, while victims and their families are denied justice and redress. Excellencies, the OIC Secretariat call upon the international body to uphold its responsibility to ensure Israel respect for and full compliances with the provision of international law and UN resolutions, including inter alia Security Council Resolution 2334 of 2016, which provides a clear path toward bringing an end to Israeli violation, reviving the multilaterally sponsored peace process that shall lead to the achievement of a just, lasting, and comprehensive solution based on the international law, UN resolutions, and the Arab Peace Initiative. In closing, the OIC Secretariat reiterated its full support for the Palestinian people in their endeavor to regain their legitimate inalienable rights, including the right to return to self-determination and to establishment of the State of Palestine with full sovereignty and independence on the basis of the 1967 border with East Jerusalem as its capital. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank Ms. Kader for her statement and now give the floor to the representative of the Republic of Korea.
Mr. President, at the outset, the Republic of Korea reaffirms its support for a two-state solution in accordance with relevant Security Council resolutions, international law, and bilateral agreements. My delegation takes this opportunity to reiterate its position that the status quo of the holy sites in Jerusalem must be respected. We strongly urge all sides to resume peace talks and restate our support for the mediation efforts of the Quartet and the international community. We would also like to express our support for the UN Special Coordinator for the Middle East peace process to this end. Mr. President, my delegation remains deeply concerned about Israeli settlement advancement, demolitions, and evictions. Such unilateral actions are not helpful in addressing the current situation. As Resolution 2334 clearly underlines, such settlements have no legal validity and constitute a flagrant violation under international law. Particularly, the settlement plans in the E1 and E2 areas in the West Bank, which may precipitate the territorial and geographical disconnection of a future independent state of Palestine, must not be advanced. It is also very alarming that violent incidents both in Israel and Palestine have increased. We call on all sides to refrain from actions and incitement that escalate tensions. Furthermore, no terrorist attacks can be justified. Any form of violence against the civilians must stop immediately. Most of all, those who are responsible for such reprehensible acts must be held accountable. We also echo the Secretary General's statement calling for an independent and transparent investigation into the killing of Palestinian-American journalist Shirin Abu Akleh, as well as ensuring accountability for those responsible. We take note of the briefing of UN High Commissioner for Human Rights spokesperson on the conclusion of the office's independent monitoring in this context. Mr. President, we remain concerned about the deteriorating humanitarian situation in the West Bank and Gaza Strip due to food and energy prices hikes. The role of UNRWA for Palestinian refugees, particularly vis-à-vis taking care of the health and education of girls and boys, is now more critical than ever. In this regard, the Korean government will remain steadfast in supporting UNRWA through continued financial contribution. Mr. President, the Republic of Korea reaffirms its strong commitment to continued constructive role in advancing peace and stability in the region in close cooperation with the UN and international community. Thank you.
I thank the representative of the Republic of Korea for the statement. There are no more names inscribed on the list of speakers. This meeting is adjourned.
Bonsoir famille, cela se passe au Mali. précisément à Meneka, voilà, dans la région de Meneka. Aujourd'hui, la MINUSMA a été repoussée par la population. Comme vous le savez, hein, vous connaissez tous le travail de ces personnes. Nous avons vu en Côte d'Ivoire, c'est dans ces mêmes cargos onusiennes que l'ONU transportait les terroristes dans les villes de la Côte d'Ivoire, puisqu'ils avaient l'autorisation de circuler tranquillement. Ils mettaient les terroristes dans des véhicules comme ça, blindés, et puis les faisaient circuler dans la localité d'Abidjan, où ils les plaçaient un peu partout, Abidjan, pour attaquer nos forces de l'ordre. Et c'est avec ces mêmes véhicules-là, ils ont transporté les microbes d'Alassane Ouattara pour aller les déposer à Bobo, ce qu'on appelait le commando invisible. Voilà, donc famille, comme vous pouvez le remarquer là, la population malienne a repoussé la MINUSMA avec des... Voilà, c'est ce qu'on vous demande. Il faut surveiller vos villes. Il ne faut pas laisser n'importe qui pénétrer à l'intérieur de vos quartiers. Si vous voyez ce genre de véhicules blindés, il faut les repousser à l'aide des cailloux. Voilà, nous ne devons plus rigoler avec ce combat car il est l'heure. Il est l'heure, famille. Il faut agir. Et pour agir, nous avons besoin du courage de tout le monde. Merci encore à la population de Meneka. Merci à la famille malienne. Merci beaucoup. Merci à nos autorités maliennes. Merci à Assimi Goïta. Assimi Goïta qui protège ce peuple. Et ce peuple qui se défend aussi grâce à Dieu, avec la foi de Dieu. Et Dieu est avec nous. Merci encore à cette population malienne. Voilà, nous avons repoussé ces terroristes en billets, en tenue de ONU et avec des camions onusiennes qui transportent des terroristes partout au Mali. Là, c'est terminé ça. Ça ne va plus se passer comme ça. Désormais, on voit un camion onusien, un véhicule blindé onusien. Il faut repousser ces véhicules-là, il faut les lapider. Il ne faut pas accepter que ces véhicules-là traversent vos villes. Voilà, ces véhicules-là ne doivent plus circuler au Mali. C'est ça qui est la vérité.
It is so decided. The Security Council will now begin its consideration of item 2 of the agenda. I now give the floor to Ms. Janine Enis-Placher.
Thank you, Mr. President. And thank you for the opportunity to provide an update on recent tragic events in Sago district, the Hoek Governorate, resulting in the loss of 9 civilian lives and injuring 33 others. Now, in my most recent briefing to this council, I questioned, and not for the first time, the use of shelling and missiles as the new normal for Iraq, warning that this was a very risky way to advance interests and one which further weakens the state of Iraq. Well, here is what we know so far. In the early afternoon of 20 July, 5 rounds of artillery struck Parga Resort. This resort is a well-known tourist destination, and as would be expected at this time of year, it was packed with visitors, including children. The first round impacted on an unpopulated hillside overlooking Parga. However, the next rounds hit the center of the resort, killing, as I said, 9 civilians, including 3 children, one of whom was a 1-year-old infant, and injuring 33. 11 of the injured have reportedly undergone surgery and 3 remain in critical condition. Immediately following the attack, Prime Minister Mustafa Al-Kadhimi established a committee. The same day, this committee visited the site of the attack to witness the devastation, to collect evidence, and to engage with witnesses and local authorities. Based on its assessment of the evidence collected, the government of Iraq, in the clearest of terms, attributed the tragic events to Turkish armed forces. In the meantime, the Turkish Foreign Ministry issued a press release stating that Turkey is against all kinds of attacks targeting civilians, that it is ready to take all steps to reveal the truth, inviting Iraqi government officials not to make statements under the influence of the rhetoric and propaganda of the treacherous terrorist organization and to cooperate in bringing the real perpetrators of this tragic incident into light. The next day, on social media, the Turkish embassy in Baghdad stated, "We join our condolences for our Iraqi brothers who were martyred at the hands of the terrorist organization PKK." Meanwhile, also on 20 July, the PKK issued a statement denying presence in the area, blaming Turkey for the attack. Mr. President, in response to the tragic events, Iraq's National Security Council held an emergency session the same day. This council strongly condemned the Turkish attack and rejected the use of Iraqi territory as a base to attack neighboring countries and settle accounts. Among other directives issued, the foreign minister was tasked with preparing an integrated file on the repeated Turkish attacks against Iraq, as well as to summon the Turkish ambassador and recall the Iraqi chargé d'affaires from Ankara without sending a new ambassador to Turkey. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs noted that Iraq's government would resort to the highest levels of diplomatic response, including the UN Security Council. On 21 July, Iraqi leaders from across the political spectrum held a high-level meeting and issued a joint statement condemning the Turkish attack and supporting the procedures for international complaints. On 23 July, Prime Minister Mustafa Al-Kadhimi met with KRG Prime Minister Masroor Barzani. In a joint statement issued after the meeting, the two sides expressed their strong condemnation of the Turkish aggressions on Iraqi territory. Also on 23 July, the Council of Representatives convened to discuss the incident in the presence of the Foreign and Defense Ministers, the Army Chief of Staff, as well as the Deputy Commander of Joint Operations. In his presentation to Parliament, the Foreign Minister noted that more than 22,700 Turkish violations of Iraqi sovereignty had been recorded since 2018. He also stated that the Foreign Ministry had submitted 296 memoranda of protest against Turkish interference since 2018. During the same meeting, the Parliamentary Security and Defense Committee recommended the expulsion of PKK elements from Iraq, the withdrawal of all Turkish forces, the redeployment of federal forces along the border with Turkey, the abolition of security agreements, if any, with Turkey, and the review of the defense budget to enhance its military capabilities. In essence, while no one wishes for further escalation, Iraq demands that Turkey withdraws its forces from all Iraqi lands and calls for an investigation. Mr. President, this horrific attack on a well-known and clearly identifiable tourist site demonstrates a shocking disregard for civilian life and for the universally accepted standards of international humanitarian and human rights law, which seek to protect civilians. While all parties to any conflict must take all feasible precautions to avoid harm to civilians at all times, this was clearly not adhered to. In my conversation with Iraq's Prime Minister yesterday, he once again emphasized the importance of a transparent and thorough investigation, independent or neutral.
Après Kintel et à Brazzaville, où s'est tenu en janvier 2022 les travaux de la 20e session ordinaire qui ont abouti à l'investiture du président Félix-Antoine Tshisekedi Tshilombo à la tête de la Communauté économique des États de l'Afrique centrale, en sigle CEAC, par les différents chefs d'État et de gouvernement de cette organisation sous-régionale, c'est au tour de Kinshasa, la capitale congolaise, d'abriter la 21e session ordinaire de la conférence des chefs d'État et de gouvernement de la CEAC. La République démocratique du Congo, à travers son président, va une fois de plus faire entendre sa voix à l'international. Au total, 11 délégations sont attendues en terre congolaise pour participer à cette conférence qui aura lieu dans ce somptueux chapiteau aménagé à la Cité de l'Union africaine. Parmi les premiers participants arrivés à Kinshasa ce dimanche figure le président de la République du Tchad, le général Mahamet Idriss Déby, et le premier ministre du Gabon, Madame Rose Christiane Osuka Raponda. Aussitôt arrivé, le président tchadien a été reçu à la Cité de l'Union africaine par son homologue Félix-Antoine Tshisekedi Tshilombo. Le tête-à-tête des deux chefs d'État a duré près d'1 heure et aucune déclaration n'a été faite à la presse. L'objectif central de la 21e session est de s'assurer du fonctionnement régulier des institutions de la communauté à travers le contrôle et le suivi de la mise en œuvre des politiques ainsi que les décisions approuvées par les instances communautaires. Cette conférence a été précédée de réunions préparatoires qui ont eu lieu à Kinshasa du 15 au 23 juillet courant.